Okay, this is Tree Soup D&D. I'm back with another video. Today I will be talking about the wildlife of the plane of Ravnica with a view to running your own game of D&D in the setting of Ravnica. So Ravnica, as you may know, is a plane that's made entirely of cityscape. It's an ecumenopolis that almost all of it is covered in cityscape. This makes it quite an interesting plane to set your campaign on, and it's also one of my favourite planes. Much of the information I'm basing this video on is taken from the D&D sourcebook Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. A lot of it is also taken from stuff I've learned from the Magic Wiki and from the card base Gatherer, but a lot of it is also stuff I've just made up or surmised from various things I've read. There's a lot of different creatures on Ravnica. I think there is definitely scope there for threats and encounters up to very high level. There's creatures that are some of the biggest in the Magic multiverse on Ravnica. It is a very big place, and it is home to some very big and very dangerous creatures. I'm mostly sticking to sort of wildlife and wildlife adjacent things in this video. There are lots of humanoid races that I could discuss as well, and other monsters, but just sticking to mostly things that are animals or close to such. So let's begin. So I thought I'd organise this by height. So first up, we've got birds. So the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, it states that there is scope on Ravnica for including any of the beasts from the monster manual and any of the monsters from the monster manual in Ravnica in some state or other, or as equivalents to other things. I think that's a good sort of freeing option, but I think it's best to try and be more specific and use things that are actually shown in the card game and the artwork from that. But if you want to use any particular monster, you can. It's just some are more fitting than others. So much of this video is about just showing you what there actually is. So in terms of birds, a lot of the guilds use various different birds as familiars and messengers and riding creatures. The Azorius quite like using owls and eagles. Owls make good familiars for judges, and they are known to also use giant owls and giant eagles. There is a lot of references to doves as well. There's a spell called Dovescape, in which you change all of your opponent's spells into flocks of doves. It's a peaceful alternative to counterspell, I guess. The Azorius like to use birds. The Boros as well use a lot of hawks and use those as couriers. The Orzhov use hawks as couriers too, and they're known to use vultures as well. There's a card called Syndicate Messenger which depicts this sort of vulture-like creature. And the Selesnya like to use eagles and giant falcons for riding and messenger purposes, and they often use like flocks of eagles to sort of help them in battle. There's also the birds of paradise present on Ravnica. Judging by the art, I don't think this represents what a real world bird of paradise actually looks like. This is something else. There's also the implication the bird of paradise is slightly magical. It gives you extra mana as a creature, so there's possibly some sort of magical effect from the bird of paradise that you could incorporate into its stat line. I've also included here some things that are likely to appear on Ravnica, such as ravens. I could see ravens being a good messenger for the Dimir, and magpies, and there absolutely has to be gulls and pigeons on Ravnica. It's a city plane. If anything's living on Ravnica, it's going to be gulls and pigeons. If you look over here, you've got the bronzebeak moa. This is a large flightless bird used by the Selesnya. It sort of fills in as the equivalent of the axe beak in the monster manual. So it's a bit like an ostrich, I guess, but a bit more deadly. And by the looks of it, the Selesnya sometimes armour them up and use them as fighting beasts. There's a lot of evidence of the Selesnya using animals as fighting creatures. Not necessarily in a malicious way, but in a sort of defending nature sort of way. Obviously they protect them with armour because they value them, not just using them as cannon fodder. And also in this section you've got this thing called the Cloudfin Raptor. This is a Simic mutant. So there's going to be a lot of creatures in this list that are mutations created by the Simic. That's part of what that guild does. They like to alter things' biology to make them better and more suited for life in the city. It's arguable about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, especially for the peoples of Ravnica, because they do create some strange things and let them loose. I think their purpose is to create creatures that are self-sustaining, and that once they've released a population of them into the wild, that they are able to breed with each other and become a stable mutation and eventually an actual part of the wildlife. There's lots of creatures in Ravnica that it's very possible that they are a result of previous experiments of the Simic from the distant past, and that these things have just been around for so long breeding that they have just become stable mutations in the zoological profile of Ravnica. So I'll point those out as we go along. But this thing, Cloudfin Raptor, in this version is depicted, it's obviously got something like lizard DNA in there, maybe a duck as well. It's quite a strange thing, but quite adorable in its way. Make a good pet for a Simic character. So moving to the right here, we've got the phoenixes. So there's several depictions of phoenixes in Ravnica. The Art-Light Phoenix is a sort of electric phoenix that's employed by the Izzet. I think they use its powers in power plants, and it can generate a lot of electricity. Also can be quite dangerous to other people. You've got this Skagan Firebird, which is a phoenix that would be present in the rubble belt where the Groll live. A wild phoenix that hasn't been tamed or harnessed by other guilds, just sort of left to its own devices out in the wilds. So the rubble belt is sort of the last remaining wild areas in Ravnica that's mostly populated by the Groll and beasts. It's still got elements of the city about it, but it is a lot more wild than the city itself. So it's full of lots of strange creatures. And you also got the Torchlight Phoenix. Not sure whether this is a specific breed of phoenix, but it is depicted stealing fire from street lights. Ravnica has its own system of lighting, probably in magical rather than natural gas or electricity, but it's a possible problem for infrastructure in that things like phoenixes might steal the power they need to light the place at night. Moving across, we've got griffins, a popular staple in Dungeons and Dragons. These are as they would be depicted in the monster manual. They make good mounts. There's evidence of both the Azorius and the Boros using griffins and armouring them up for battle and using them as mounts for their Sky Knights. There'll also be wild griffins around as well. So moving right, we've got rocks. These are in the Guildmaster's Guide as Skyjack rocks. It's a much less beefy version of the rock than in the monster manual. I think the monster manual rock is a huge creature. These are more modest and suited to just being a riding beast. The term Skyjack that they've used, I think, is just the airborne version of the Wojeks, which are the investigative wing of the Boros League. So I'm not sure that the term Skyjack rock is particularly apt. It should probably be more called like a Sky Knight rock. So Sky Knight would be more a general term. I guess a Skyjack is a Wojek Sky Knight. Both the Azorius and Boros use Sky Knights. In the Azorius Liev column for numerous Sky Knights. So those are good mounts for those guilds. I've included gargoyles here as well. These are often employed by the Orzhov as mounts and companions. With the renown system in the Guildmaster's Guide, there's a lot of routes that you can take in various guilds that involve you getting flying mounts. The Boros can get the Skyjack rock, and the Selesnya can become an Equinaut and get a Pegasus. And I'm thinking if your party's made up of several different kinds of guilds, you're going to end up with some party members that have got flying mounts and some party members that don't have flying mounts. And if some of your party got flying mounts and the others don't, then you're going to end up with situations where there's no real point in having a flying mount, because what's the point in a couple of people flying and a couple of people walking? You're just eventually going at the walking speed. So I've tried to sort of identify possibilities for mounts to give to other guild characters as well, which should make it a bit more even. I have some issues with the renown system in the Guildmaster's Guide. It is very powerful and very disruptive. It's something I've had to tinker with the most out of the things I've used in the Guildmaster's Guide. It's very interesting though. But if everyone's getting flying mounts, it's a bit more fun, I think. So also included the Sphinxes. So Sphinxes are mostly associated with the Azorius. Their guildmaster is a Sphinx, and they are lawful creatures usually. I think there are a lot of guildless Sphinxes as well, but they are mainly blue creatures. They're not quite wildlife. These are sort of wildlife adjacent because they are slightly animalistic, but they are intelligent creatures. So I don't think you could really convince a Sphinx to be your mount long term. They might give you a lift, but they're not going to be your flying horse. And there's also got a Demir Sphinx as well. This is the Dream Eater Sphinx, which is a very scary creature that I created stats for. Made for quite an interesting fight. This is the Gloam Wing. This is something that's actually in the Guildmaster's Guide. This is the mount for the spectres in the Demir Guild. I don't think you can actually ride one of these as a non-spectre, so this wouldn't be a good mount for a Demir character unless you came up with some real way to bend that rule. They kind of linked with the spectre, and I think if one goes, then so does the other. But just included it here because it was interesting. This is a Lamassu. These are creatures that apparently have been around for a very long time. I'm not sure whether they are so ancient themselves or whether it's just their species has been around a long time, but there's lots of references to them ruling the Veld before the city was here, so they used to fly over the grasslands. They are often depicted being hunted or persecuted or hunted by some nameless horror. So I think it makes for quite a good plot hook to have a Lamassu that you're helping with its nameless horror. There's not a huge amount written about them, and I think there is a stat block for Lamassus currently in 5th edition D&D. So I haven't used one of these yet, so I haven't statted it. Interesting. They are similar to Sphinxes in that they are a creature that's got a humanoid element to it, even though its body is that of an animal. I think its body's a bull. It's got wings, and it's got a human face and horns, and they are intelligent as well and can speak. They are still around, as they have been depicted in the most recent Ravnica set. Yeah, I think something I'd like to experiment with in the future. This is a winged Felidar. This is the mount for the Archons, specifically the Archon of the Triumvirate that's in the Guildmaster's Guide. They're sort of a horned cat creature that has wings, and it's a celestial rather than an animal or a beast. It's similar to the Gloam Wing, that it's linked to its rider. It's linked to the Archon, so probably not a good player character mount, but it's something that you could see flying above Ravnica quite often. They are creatures of law. Down here we've got some flying insects, flying bugs. I've included giant wasps just for the giant insect spell, which might be something that your druid uses. I haven't spotted any actual depictions in Ravnica of giant wasps, but they're probably there. You've got the spy bugs. I'm not sure whether this is actually what the species name is, but this is a creature that's employed by the Demir as a spying implement. I assume they've got some sort of magic attached to them that allows them to spy on their target, or maybe they've got some sort of like mimicking attribute to the bug itself. When a Demir is bugging your room, they are literally bugging your room. Next to that, you've got the Spire Mangler. This is a species of giant insect that's big enough to eat birds. There's a artwork, it's chasing around what looks to be a dove. So that's something you can see in the rooftops of Ravnica. there's enough flying creatures in Ravnica, in the Ravnica bestiary, that you could spend a lot of your time airborne or in the rooftops of Ravnica. You could have a whole part of the campaign just on your flying mounts, and there'd be enough creatures to use as flying creatures. This is the Zanakev Locust. So Zanakev is the largest above ground Golgari enclave. The Golgari guild usually spend their time in the Undercity, but there are instances of them being above ground, and in Zanakev they use these giant locust beetles to fly around with, so they make a good flying mount for them. Next to that you've got bats, both the regular and giant kind. These are employed in numerous numbers by the Orzhov guild. They have an affinity for bats, possibly because a lot of their members are vampires, and there's a lot of suggestions that some of the bats have vampiric abilities as well. They might not necessarily be mundane bats, they might have vampiric powers, but these make a possible mount for Orzhov guild members and familiars for Orzhov guild members. Under that you've got the Pegasus. This is a mount that's often employed by the Schlesnia. They have a whole group of Sky Knights called the Equinauts, which fly around on Pegasuses. They often are horse archers as well. There's instances of huge herds of Pegasuses or Pegasi roaming the skies of Ravnica. There's a card called Storm Herd, which depicts a big herd of them, which could make an interesting threat. They're not necessarily hostile, but just that there's a lot of them that makes them dangerous. This is a bunch of Simic creatures that are airborne. Here you've got the Sky Swallower. This is something from the Ravnica Guildmaster's Guide. It's an airborne leviathan that is big enough to threaten airships and people on flying mounts. It can just swallow you right up. It's a gargantuan creature. It's a little on the small side in terms of hit points for a gargantuan creature, but it's still a reasonable threat, I think. You've got other instances of sky leviathans as well, such as the Nimbus Swimmer. This is some sort of cloud manta, a cloud manta that is big enough to threaten people on mounts in the air. It's possible that there's a lot of different kinds of leviathans created or altered by the Simic. It's possible this is something that was released by them years ago or recently, and they might come in different assortments. You've got Zeppelids. This is a creature that's borne aloft by big gas bags in its body. It's quite a strange creature. It's to be seen floating around. I think Simic used to use them as assault animals. This artwork was from a card called Assault Zeppelid, so you could see them coming down from above to wage combat on their enemies. I assume this thing usually fights by just like ramming into things and crushing them with its big bony protrusions, and you see it losing altitude if you pop its floaty gas bags. There is a creature in the original Ravnica set called Helium Squirter, which I think is a Simic mutation of some kind. I'm not sure what it's mutated from, but it's another thing that's covered in gas bags, or specifically helium gas bags, and it was used to make other creatures fly. So yeah, it's quite a strange one, that one. Quite hard to work out what its purpose is, but if you needed to fly, it could be used for that. There's a lot of creatures in the Ravnica bestiary that are from the first Ravnica set, which they haven't been seen since then. So it's possible that they're kind of best left in the past. They're failed experiments or things that are a bit too goofy for current day Magic sets. You've also got this creature called the Trigon, which is a predatory creature that is borne aloft by consuming magic. So it will suck the magic out of your magical artifacts and maybe suck the spell levels out of you, or spell slots out of you, to allow it to fly around. It's depicted slightly differently in different artworks. I prefer this current one because the artwork is a bit better. It's also got Pteramander, which is a mutation of a salamander and a drake. So it's got wings. It also appears to have a big gas bag that keeps it aloft, so maybe a bit of Zeppelin in there. This is another Simic mutation that I think has reached a stable position. There is a depiction of a more recent Pteramander that has been made out of Ethereum, so an artifact version of it, an artifact creature. This would be in the Omen Paths era of Magic the Gathering, where people can move between planes freely. So Ethereum is from the plane of Alara, specifically Esper, so it would suggest outside interference. So we've got dragons. There's quite a few dragons in Ravnica. The main one being Niv-Mizzet, the leader of the Izzet Guild. He is a very powerful wizard and a genius intellect. He's also very, very territorial, and it's suggested that he has killed off all of the other elder dragons that presented a threat to his supremacy. He has been around for about 16,000 years, which is 6,000 years more than the Guild Pact itself. He is very prone to getting rid of dragons. It doesn't mean there aren't other dragons, but I think he reduces the number of dragons that are present on Ravnica just by him being around. The big Ravnican dragons are called Hellkites. These would be the wild dragons that live out in the rubble belt and out trying to stay out of the sphere of influence of Niv-Mizzet and live their own life and collect their own treasures. There's depictions of Hellkites being used as mounts by the Groll. See, this one's got a big skull attached to it. You got Hellkite whelps as well, so they have younger Hellkites. And there's also a depiction of a pit dragon that's been enslaved by the Rakdos and made to fight in fighting pits. It's had its wings sheared down to a nub, and it's obviously a lot more stunted than other dragons, so it's living a quite horrible existence. Next to dragons, we've got drakes. So whereas dragons are intelligent, the drakes are not. They can't speak, and they are mostly like beasts. They only have 2 legs, unlike dragons, which have 4. There are numerous drakes in Ravnica. I don't think Niv-Mizzet is particularly worried about the presence of drakes. Drakes are a lot smaller than him, and they aren't intelligent, so they don't present a threat to him. They are mentioned in the Guildmaster's Guide as being about the size of a great eagle, so you use that stat line for the giant eagle. And the bigger ones can be depicted as the stat line of a wyvern, although I don't think they'd have the wyvern's stinger, so maybe give them some other kind of attack. You don't really see drakes with the big stingers on their tail. There's numerous depictions of drakes in Magic the Gathering. This isn't all of them here. This is just some of the ones I picked out. So they're employed by lots of different guilds as mounts or beasts. So there's a drake decked out in Azorius armor. It's obviously used as a mount for a Liev Sky Knight. You've got this Rakdos drake as well, which might be a creature for a fighting pit. You've got a couple of Izzet drakes here. This is the older version of it, and this is a more current version of it that's been decked out in Izzet paraphernalia and magical devices. Drakes don't usually breathe fire, but there is one depiction of a torch drake which breathes fire. So I assume this is due to Izzet experimentation rather than being naturally like that. Although the Izzet are not as prone to experimenting on creatures as the Simic are. They tend to be more interested in artifice. You've got a few named species of drakes, such as the Muse drake and the Wind drake. But this thing here is a leaf drake. This is another example of a stable mutation created by the Simic. These creatures will make their nests at the top of buildings, and I think they have control over plants to a degree, so they can make roots and plants all come together and to form their nests. And they have become a bit of a nuisance, but they are essentially a stable mutation. You got a few obviously magical drakes that have specific powers, such as the Sapphire Drake, which has got this big sapphire that's been embedded in its head that gives it powers. and the mind's eye drake, which has a big eye in its chest for spying purposes, is possibly a Dimir drake. And there's numerous instances of drakelings, younger drakes, being used as familiars or pets. You could use a drakeling as the pseudo dragon stat line, although once again it wouldn't have the stinger tail. These things are sort of depicted being big enough to chase birds around and eat them. You have to worry that if you take a little drake as a pet, it's eventually going to grow to bigger sizes, so they're not the most convenient creature to have as a pet. So going down, we have got, hopefully you're not arachnophobic, we've got a lot of spiders. So there's numerous depictions of spiders in Ravnican artwork. The terrain of Ravnica, as mostly buildings, so lends itself to gigantic, absolutely massive spiders making big webs in between the buildings and catching airborne prey such as drakes. It's always drakes that are being eaten. But you've got a few specific spiders that have some interesting properties. So the spore web spider, I think, is a species of undercity spider that has some fungus growing on its back, and I think would use poisonous spores to attack its prey. This is a snare spinner spider. This is the one that's most like to be the generic giant spider in the D&D monster manual. It makes its webs in between buildings and catches birds. Then you've got the hitchclaw recluse spider. This one, rather than using webs to catch its prey, it has two very long front limbs that have hooks on them, and I figured it would live in the forest and go up and down tall trees, and it would lift you up with its hooks after ambushing you, then take you up the tree and then dropping you to your death. Then it can feed on you that way rather than just trapping you in a web and poisoning you. So that'd be an interesting giant spider variant which I've used. This is the Aquastrand spider, which is another Simic mutation. It has a strange sort of extra sticky web that comes out of it. I'm not sure how different it is to just regular spider webs, but it sort of has all this glistening mucilage coming off of it. It's just a more powerful giant spider. Then you've got the Glintweaver spider, which is one of the huge spiders. This one is prone to collecting treasure and glittering objects and sticking them in its web. Quite a interesting risk-reward scenario for you see all this treasure in the web and you don't see the spider, and then you go and try and steal the treasure and you have to fight a really big spider. It's a huge spider. And you've got the hatchery spider, which is another one from the Undercity. So this one makes very large broods of offspring. So you could see it making swarms of spiders when you fight it, or something along those lines. Just having to deal with spider eggs as well as the main spider itself. You've got the mammoth spider, just a much bigger version of the spiders that make their webs between buildings. You've got to wonder how the people living in those buildings feel about having such a big spider near them, or whether they're just making their webs on abandoned buildings or buildings in the rubble belt. Because if I had a big spider that big near my window, I'd be calling the building manager very, very quickly. And then you've got spiders that are gargantuan size, such as the Goliath spider. They just get as big as they can be. This one appears to have got himself a big drake in its web. But yeah, the spiders on Ravnica, they don't really seem to have an upper limit to how big they can get. Got such a big plane, you get very big creatures. And moving across, we've got various kinds of beetles and insects. So according to the guide, there is a species of beetle called the prana beetles that are good for the swarm of insects stat line. These things can skeletonize someone in minutes, like a piranha. One of the leaders of the Golgari, the Matka Azoni, who's the spiritual leader of the Devkrin elves, she is borne aloft by swarms of beetles when she moves, because she has an affinity for insects. So that'd be something that incorporated a fight against her. You've got the Deadbridge Goliath beetle, which is a beast of burden for the Golgari in the Undercity. This is mentioned in the guide as being equal to a Triceratops in terms of stats. You also got the grave shell scarab beetle, which is another one that Golgari used to ride around in, so it's also similar to a Triceratops. This thing here is, I think the card is called Golgari Longlegs, but I just opted for the name Strider instead. I thought Golgari Longlegs was a bit of a goofy name. This is an insectoid creature that is ostensibly used as a mount by the Golgari. You can see it's got a saddle atop it, and it's just got incredibly long legs, so it's probably good for moving around quite quickly. But it's also said that it's able to sort of fold itself up, so it can fit in even smaller spaces, like little sewer tunnels and whatnot, so it can be quite stealthy if it wishes to be. This one here is the rust scarab. I'd say this is probably one for the rubble belt biome. It's a giant scarab beetle that has the magical power or innate power to rust things. So it probably has some of the properties of a rust monster from the monster manual. That would make an interesting encounter. Another example of gigantism in Ravnica is this creature, a giant adaphage. That's what the card is called. An adaphage is a kind of real world beetle that exists on Earth. I think this means gluttonous. So it's a beetle that eats a lot of things. I think they can spit as well, so that would be something quite dangerous, seeing as this thing is gargantuan size. It's depicted as being as big as a building, so I think it'd be gargantuan. I haven't really come up with stats for this one yet, but that's something that you could come up against, just because there is just so many examples of things being massive on Ravnica. You've got various species of centipede and millipede. There are these creatures called mortipedes, which are incredibly deadly centipedes that I assume have some kind of poison effect to them. The actual monster manual stat line of a giant centipede is very weedy. It's only got 4 hit points, so I've made these things be a lot beefier than that, because they do strike me as being quite dangerous. You've got the kind of more mid-sized spinal centipede. This is a centipede that's got some kind of bony protuberance on it. I assume it's maybe a camouflage technique to hide in piles of bones. I shouldn't think a centipede has the wherewithal to purposely take bones and decorate itself with it, but you never know. The giant centipede here, this is I think the card is called Woodlock Crawler. It is suggested that the Demir use these centipedes in some way. I assume it's for gathering poison. I think they use their poison to adorn their weapons and ammo. It's quite vague, but this is just a kind of giant centipede that's present on Ravnica. This is a giant ragworm. Ragworm's another real-world creature. They're usually quite small. They are predatory. They eat very small creatures in the ocean. I think they adorn a tunnel with a sticky substance and use it to trap their prey. So that'd make a good part of an encounter. You can have the party trapped by it. This is a giant version that's been mutated by the Simic. This is sort of an earlier creature from the first Ravnica set. So it's not really an amalgam of 2 different creatures. It's just a ragworm that's really big. This is a giant version of the Solifuge, or Solifugi. I'm not sure whether it's pronounced one way or the other. I've got conflicting evidence on both sides. So this is it's a bit like a spider. It's sometimes known as a camel spider. This is an ambush predator that hides underneath the sand and will sort of leap out at you when you get close by, and it transfixes you with its huge jaws. It's got big biting jaws. It's a bit like a spider, but it has 10 limbs, so it's not quite a spider. And it doesn't have webs. It just uses its big jaws to trap things. I made it have a sort of a grappling attack. So when it bites you, it grapples you as well and chews on you. Those are good ambush predators for the rubble belt. And you've got some kinds of giant slug. These are good things for the sewer, low-level threats for the sewer. The catacombs slug is a particularly large slug that feeds on the dead. It's quite gross. Then you've got the Skylasher. This is a strange insect creature. I'm not sure whether it's I shouldn't think it's based on anything from the real world. It seems to be pure fantasy. It's depicted once again taking down a drake. It's some sort of multi-limbed creature insect that can sort of hide on the side of buildings, and it shoots out these barbed tentacles that take things out of the air. So it feeds on flying creatures. So that'd be another good ambush predator for the rubble belt, especially if they've got flying mounts. You've got scorpions, both regular and giant. So there's several depictions of scorpions being present in the Undercity, so hiding in the sewers as well. And you've got numerous kinds of leeches. So you've got regular leeches, you've got giant leeches. There's some artwork depicting some Vidalcans sitting on a lovely fountain just about to be attacked by a giant leech. And more recently you've got the dual leech, which is a two-headed gigantic leech, which obviously twice as bad as a giant leech. And then you've also got a slightly more supernatural mind leech mass. So these were a key plot point in the original Ravnica books, that people were being devoured by these psychic leeches called lupals, and then duplicates were being made of them, which caused a lot of intrigue. This is sort of a big psychic mass of leeches that works as a kind of gestalt and can form a humanoid form to fight the party and cause havoc with duplicates. You've got more kinds of beetles. You've got the drudge beetle, which is a beast of burden in the Undercity for the Golgari. You've got the dusk shell beetle. This is another thing that's depicted preying on street lights, street lamps. It's sort of sucking up the energy from them. So there are a few different creatures that gain sustenance from being parasites on the grid. Obviously, you've got magic powered lights. Things that are thaumophages can survive off that. It would make an interesting encounter for the party to have to look into a bunch of reports of streetlights going out, and they could see these dusk shell beetles or that torchlight phoenix in action. And you've got the iron shell beetle. This is something that's depicted chewing on a metal park bench, so it's some sort of ferrophage, and it uses the metal that it eats to make its carapace harder and protect itself from predators. So that one could have properties where it eats the party's armour, which everyone loves when that happens. We've got some crocodiles. So with a lot of the waterways in Ravnica are canals. The oceans are underground because they've been built over so many times. And there's lots of sewer networks as well. So most of the crocodiles are going to be living in the sewers, I'd think. And there's instances of gharials, which are a bit like crocodiles, and regular sized crocodiles, and you've got gigantic crocodiles as well. There's a region of the Undercity called Stonefair, which I think is associated with the Gorgons, and there are notably big crocodiles living there. We've got numerous kinds of lizard. So we've got the Moloch lizards. These are a species of giant lizard that has spiky backs. They are present on several planes, including Ravnica, and there is a little variation in their depiction. I quite like this artwork here. These make good watchdogs for goblin towns, I think. Good pets for goblins. There is another artwork of Moloch depicted as the whiptail Moloch, but I'm not really fond of this artwork. It is very inconsistent with the other kind of Moloch, and it looks bizarre. It looks slightly like the alien in Alien. So this is one I wouldn't really use. It's possible that whiptail Moloch is another kind of species of Moloch, or there's just another Moloch. Some of the disadvantages of using older Magic the Gathering art is a little less art direction and a lot more inconsistencies. As time goes by, there's a lot more art direction and a lot more consistency in world building. They do world building guides before they start. I think they had started doing this when the first Ravnica set was created, but it is only increased as time's gone on and consistency has been increased. So yeah, I don't like this one. You've got the brown scale lizard, which is another beast of burden for the Golgari in the Undercity. And then you've got the Crosda monitor lizard, which is a gigantic lizard. It's obviously it lives or it patrols the Crosda labyrinth, which is where the Golgari Guild Hall is hidden, and appears to have got some sort of fungus outbreak on it, but that's very common amongst Golgari creatures. You've got the Bellows lizard, which is a fire-breathing lizard. I think these are used in the smelting quarter for obvious reasons. Help stoke your furnace fires. There are a couple of depictions of basilisks. There's a Simic basilisk, which is a mutated one that's got lots of extra eyes. And there's a Necrolisk, which is an undead basilisk. So working on that principle, there must be normal basilisks as well, even if there isn't a card for that. I've just used the sort of generic basilisk artwork for that. You could see them as being sort of like watchdogs for Gorgons. And here, this thing's got a rip scale. This brings up the question of whether dinosaurs exist on Ravnica. So this creature is comes from the card Rip Scale Predator, which shows this strange lizard-like creature fighting a bunch of Slesnia soldiers, and they're all quite scared of it. Now this, in its original printing, was depicted as creature type lizard, but then in further printings of it later on, after revisions of creature type, it got the creature type dinosaur. Now it's hard to see just how bizarre this creature is, but it doesn't look that much like a dinosaur. It's named Ripscale Predator, doesn't suggest that it's a dinosaur. Like, Ripscale isn't a species of dinosaur I know. If it was called Ripscale Raptor, then maybe I could see why they had to change it to dinosaur, because it's a raptor, but it's not. Its stat line in the card game is quite huge. It'd actually be able to tussle with a dragon, but its depiction, it's not that much larger than an elf. So yeah, I don't like this thing. No offense to the artist, but I don't really like the design of this creature. I think it's gangly and weird. It doesn't look like a dinosaur, and I would fall on the side of the fence that says dinosaurs don't exist on Ravnica. If you want them to exist on Ravnica, they can, but I think there's enough giant creatures on Ravnica and other things that fill the role of dinosaurs. I don't think there needs to be dinosaurs on Ravnica. Another thing that complicates it is there is a card called Huatli's Raptor that shows a raptor dinosaur on Ravnica. But this card and its artwork is from a period of Ravnica where planeswalkers were rife on Ravnica, and this raptor was obviously taken from another plane, obviously taken from Ixalan, where Huatli's from. So I don't think that is evidence for there being dinosaurs on Ravnica. Obviously, if Huatli's on Ravnica, she can bring dinosaurs there, and she could possibly create a population of dinosaurs on Ravnica. But yeah, I would definitely fall on the side of the fence that dinosaurs don't need to be on Ravnica. You don't need them. So next is boars. Boars are a common creature employed by the Gruul. They are quite a revered creature, I think, as they represent the sort of brutal nature of the Gruul on a rampage. It's something to aspire to. The regular boar stat line just represents the normal boars, but you get bigger and bigger boars. You got these things, they call them batter boars in the Guildmaster's Guide, which represent the giant boar. And then you've got the even bigger giant batter boar, which is a huge variant of it, which uses the mammoth stat line. These boars just get bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on, and they get angrier. And you've also got the old god Ilhag the Raised Boar, which is a god that reappears in the storyline as the Gruul get closer to the old ways and start worshipping their old animalistic gods and manifesting them to appear and help them in their plight. So this is just an absolutely giant boar. The Zhirtar tribe of Gruul, I think, have an affinity for boars, and particularly like the old gods and the old ways. There's a depiction of a large boar being used as a beast of burden in the smelting quarter. The coal hauler swine, obviously boars being used in industry as well. I'm not sure the boar would be particularly happy carrying a smoking hot pan of coals. You've got these creatures that I'm not sure whether they're supposed to be connected, but I have connected them together because they're all called something horn. I refer to these things as blood balls. So you've got the slaughter horn, the rend horn, and the batter horn, various different sizes. This is all headcanon, but I think of them as being vegetarian, but they have a fondness for the taste of blood, and they're attracted to the smell of blood, and that's why they're always attacking people. So if you're like wandering through the rubble belt and you just happen to be bleeding from a previous fight, you might have to be wary of being attacked by herds of blood balls. So they prefer the taste of grass when it's got blood spilt on it, and sometimes they will spill that blood themselves on purpose by attacking you. These come in various sizes. There's the batter horn itself is depicted as being the size of a house. So it's something that it makes for an interesting nature check as you go along. You're wandering along and you're wounded, and you see this herd of cows in the distance, and you make a nature check, and then you go, oh, you should probably avoid those things if you're bleeding because they are blood balls and they're going to come and get you. This is a dromad. It's a camel-like creature, but it doesn't have a hump. It's obviously based on a dromedary camel, but without a hump. It's maybe a bit like a llama. This is another beast of burden. Uses the camel stat line. You've got bears. It's the black bears and the brown bears that the druid uses for its transformations. There is a legendary character called Yeva, Nature's Herald, who has a pet bear. There isn't really much written about her other than that she's sort of a Selesnya guardian of nature. When I was first making content for my Ravnica campaign, I noticed that there wasn't any bears depicted in Ravnican artwork, so I made the decision that bears were extinct from Ravnica, and that this creature here, the Ursipine, was the reason they were extinct. This is another stable mutation from the Simic. It's a cross between a bear and a porcupine. It's present in the wild, but it's sometimes used because it's quite useful in that you can have a beast with you that you can pluck spines out of it to be used as spears. But I never noticed that the card Yeva, because it's Yeva, the Nature's Herald, is a core set card. It didn't appear in a Ravnica set, but it is a character that's from Ravnica. So I completely missed out on that. So it's a mistake I made, but I think it makes for interesting world building. In recent years, we've had the card Duskana, the Rage Mother, appear. This is another one of the old gods that have appeared. She's depicted as a pale bear. She doesn't look particularly rageful in this artwork, but I guess she's just being the mother part with her cubs. Just don't get between her and her cubs. So she's another powerful old god, sort of along the same threat level as Ilhag, the Raised Boar. So you could see yourself either coming up against the Gruul and having to fight their gods, or fighting with the Gruul against some other oppressor and evoking their gods. Or if you are Gruul yourself, you could have these as being gods. There isn't a huge amount of religion on Ravnica, as the guilds have sort of replaced that in people's hearts. They're more about furthering the fortunes of the guilds rather than working for the benefit of gods. But they are returning with the advent of the old ways. You got goats. So there's several depictions of goats. So you've got regular goat and giant goat. Goats on Ravnica appear to have 4 horns in a sort of double V shape. I could see giant goats as being flocks for giants out in the rubble belt. Goats as being a sort of common meat animal amongst the population of Ravnica. And you've got various elks and deers. The brush strider is a kind of elk that's on Ravnica. It's very lanky and lithe, kind of elk with very small horns. It doesn't have the giant horns. It's usually a sylvan creature that goes in the forests, but it gets into people's gardens quite often, and they're very wary creatures that sort of run off at the slightest provocation. And you've got Okapis, which is a real world creature that just happens to be on Ravnica. This is the Axebane Stag. And this is sort of like the giant elk, but more powerful than that. I always thought the giant elk stat line in the monster manual was a bit weak for a huge creature. I guess the huge part comes with the giant width of its horns. It can't fit through large gaps because its horns are so big. But the Axebane Stag is a bit more of a threat. It's got like stony skin, and it lives in the Axebane forest, which is somewhere in the rubble belt. I think it's a petrified forest. A lot of the trees have turned to stone from being around for so long. So this creature is sort of guardian of the Axebane forest. And, as long as you don't provoke it, you won't get attacked. You've got moles. Another one of the Grawl old gods is Ansrag the Quake Mole. This is absolutely gigantic mole that's causing havoc and causing earthquakes. It appears to be one of them star-shaped moles. So its existence would suggest that moles are a creature that's on Ravnica, even though this artwork here is from a mole from Innistrad. There also appears to be mole humanoids now, since the most recent Ravnica set. There's not much on them yet, but there are humanoid moles that you could see meeting somewhere in the Undercity. I don't think they are necessarily Golgari or any kind of guild. I think they are guildless. You've got numerous snakes. There's the Wasteland Viper, which makes for a good giant poisonous snake. This is something that lives in the rubble belt and hides in holes and ambushes you and bites you. There's the Targia Viper. Targia is the material in between wings on, say, like a bat or something. So this is a viper that's been mutated by the Simic to be able to fly, which is quite a terrifying prospect. And you've got giant boa constrictors as well, which is the basic monster manual thing. Although you don't tend to see snakes depicted that often in Ravnica, there is so many instances of snakes being used as fodder for mutations in the Simic that there must be snakes on Ravnica, especially constrictor snakes. I've included a few apes. There is a depiction of an orangutan in Ravnica. You've also got this creature called, I think it's called Arboreal Grazer on the card, which I don't think, there's absolutely no chance that that's the actual name for the animal in a diegetic sense. You can't go around calling an animal an arboreal grazer. It just means tree grazer. So tree grazer might be a decent name for it. But this is a creature that started off as a beast but has now been reclassified as a sloth beast. So it's some kind of sloth, and they are not much threat really. But it's something that you'd see hanging around on trees out in the wilds or just in the parks. Then you've got rhinos. So the Selesnya are often use rhinos as beasts for their beastmasters. They use them in fighting as well, and the rhino is quite a powerful force on the battlefield. Then you've also got the Ceratops, which are a kind of rhino. They are depicted with these like bifurcated front horn and then a third horn, but they are essentially the stat line of a rhino, just slightly different. It's kind of strange that there's regular rhinos and a fantasy kind of rhino, but that's how it is. You've got frogs. There's numerous frogs on Ravnica. You got a lot of mutated frogs as well. The Simic seem to quite like using frogs as fodder for mutation. Some of the older mutations, like the Plaxcaster Frogling, which is a little frog mutant that can protect you from magic. And you've got the Omnibian, which is a giant frog that changes other creatures into giant frogs to cause a bit of chaos for quite an interesting encounter. And you've got the Croconura, which is a mutant that's a cross between a crocodile and a frog, and has a very long tongue for taking creatures out of the air. You've got a few more beasts of burden here. This is the Indrik. These creatures are often used as pack animals. They are like four-legged mammalian creatures with a very long neck, a bit like a mammal version of a brontosaurus. They are often depicted as being able to howl. They make a lot of noise, a howl that is enough to sort of break people's concentration on enchantments. They also sometimes depicted as being rather affectionate to their owners, as in this artwork. These use the elephant stat line, according to the guide. This brings up the question that do elephants exist on Ravnica? So we have Loxodon on Ravnica, which are the humanoid elephant creatures, and it's possible that Loxodon evolved from elephants in a similar way to how we evolved from apes, and so that means that they don't necessarily mean that Loxodon have replaced elephants. There are Loxodon on other planes. There are elephants on other planes. The plane of Tarkir has both elephants and mammoths and Loxodon, whereas the plane of Kaladesh has elephants but no Loxodon. I like to think that there's no elephants on Ravnica because I haven't seen them, and there are enough other creatures that take the place of elephants, such as the Indrik and the Kravod. So I think it's more interesting to have no elephants. Another possible bit of evidence is the mammoth spider I showed you earlier on. If that's called a mammoth spider, then does that mean that mammoths exist on Ravnica? Or can you have an adjective such as mammoth without there being mammoths in the first place? Can you have the adjective cyclopean without cyclopses being a thing? And could you have a queen-sized bed when your world doesn't have the concept of monarchy? So it's an interesting conversation to have about adjectives, but yeah. No elephants on Ravnica. That's what I say. This is a cravod. This is another kind of pack animal. They're very big, and you can fit a lot of stuff on them. Sometimes used as beasts of war as well. There's depictions of them being armoured up, and you put a howdah on the back of them and shoot your bows from off the top. Obviously quite dangerous as they are. I've got the same stat line as a mammoth, but I think they're a little bit more docile than that. Obviously used as beasts of burden. You can't have them rampaging all over the place. Just don't go slapping them, and they shouldn't cause a problem. This thing here, I'm not entirely sure what it is. It's called on the card Arms Beast, and it's used by the Orzhov. They have a howdah on the back of it, then they go around throwing coins to the poor. It looks quite large, probably about the size of a cravod, but it's got this kind of flat, bony face, the skin of a rhino. So yeah, I don't really know exactly what it is. Couldn't find any particular evidence of what it's actually called. It's another instance of I don't think there's any chance that this is going to be called its actual taxonomic term. You wouldn't call something an arms beast. That'd be quite strange. That's something it has become, not something that it started off as. It's possible that it is now always known as an arms beast, because that's the only thing it's used for, is sending out arms. But if you've got a beast of burden such as this, the chances are you're probably going to be using it for more than one thing. It probably isn't just the Orzhov that would use it. It's possible it's a very large kind of thrall, but it doesn't have the mask, so I don't think that's possible. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery on that one. We've got rats down here. So obviously as a city, Ravnica is going to be full of rats, all in the sewer and everything. There is depiction of Rakdos using supernaturally altered rats, such as the Hellhole rat, which is a rat that can set on fire, which can cause a lot of chaos. I also did a scenario that includes this rat horror creature that, if you look closely, its tail is actually a tentacle from a much bigger horror creature. Look at it, it's quite scary. So that the rat itself is just a false lure, and I used a multi-sided token to it started off as a little rat, and then as things became apparent, they realized, oh, it's not actually a rat, it's this lure from this tentacle creature. So that was quite fun. There's a lot of depictions of ogres having affinity for rats in Ravnica, being rat tamers and having affinity for rats. This is an ogre slumlord which has swarms of rats all over him. I made a scenario where this ogre slumlord had the magic item, the pipes of the swarm, which explained why he was able to control rats. And it made for an interesting scenario. So this section here, this thing here is an Ember Beast. It is inexplicably a beast rather than an elemental. The term beast in Magic the Gathering creature types is sort of like a catch-all term for a lot of different things. It's like if it isn't one thing, it's probably a beast. So this thing is some sort of fire-breathing beast that's employed in possibly the Smelting Quarter, and it is sort of controlled by Beastmasters. It's one that could be used as a beast of burden there as well, because it's obviously got some sort of affinity towards fire, so it might burn up. This is probably a better thing to be hauling around pans of burning hot coals with than that poor giant boar. So yeah, we've got a whole section here of Groll beasts. Some of them have got definite names. Other ones, not entirely sure of what their whole deal is. So this thing is a Cronch. It is a horned creature with a pig-like snout, and it's got seems to have the proportions of a very large gorilla. I could quite imagine it being able to sort of go up on its hind legs and start punching you or throwing rocks. They are often depicted being wrangled by a crunch wrangler, so they something that's employed by beastmasters. In my own headcanon, I figure that this thing is sort of omnivorous, like a boar, and I decided that the name Crunch was given to it as a sort of an onomatopoeia, that it was something that would just take a big bite out the side of a tree. It eats wood, and it makes this crunching noise. So you'd find them in forests chewing on trees, and if you disturb them, you get a log thrown at you. That's just something I made up. This thing is a Nodorog. This has been a creature that's been depicted in sets sort of dating back to the original Ravnica sets, and it sort of changes in depiction. It's sort of a four-legged creature with 3 horns. It's got a sort of bony crest. There are depictions of it being ridden, so you could tame it. From flavor text, I sort of deduced that this thing it bears a grudge that if you annoy a Nodorog, it will hunt you for a very long time. I had a situation where one of the party they made an enemy of a Nodorog, and I just stuck the hunter's mark icon on them, and that was there for a very long time before it disappeared. So it's to suggest that this Nodorog was still trying to find them. So it made for an interesting situation that was quite intimidating. This thing here is possibly a creature called a Raktusk. I'm not 100% sure. There's mention in the Guildmaster's Guide of a creature called a Raktusk, which is a 10-foot tall bison-like creature with horns. Now there's no card in Magic the Gathering that's called Raktusk. This artwork is from a creature called the Tenement Crasher, which there's no way that there's a creature called a Tenement Crasher. That's just a description, and it's depicted crashing through someone's building. It's said to have the stat line of a giant elk in the guide. So yeah, it's got the same HP and armor as a giant elk. I haven't made it huge because, as I said before, it is sort of ridiculous that a giant elk is a huge creature with the stat line it's got. But I think that's mostly the size of its horny crest. This is an Axebane beast. Is another thing you'll find in the petrified Axebane forest. It's some sort of pangolin. I think it probably has quite a tough hide and can roll up into a ball and roll around like a pangolin and attack you with its big horns. This one's called a Ferox. This is something that's been depicted a couple of times. It's a sort of 4-legged mammal creature that's got a certain amount of protection from magic. Either stops magic or makes it very hard to cast spells on it. And it's probably something akin to a bear or a great cat in terms of its size, but obviously made it a lot stronger than those. We've got a few examples down here of some questionable creatures that I'm not entirely sure what they are. This thing here is the Wrecking Beast, which is depicted busting through a big wall. I created a creature called a Rexamerox out of this that it has a warbling cry that can do thunder damage to things in a cone in front of it, and it does extra damage to buildings. So it sort of works as a predator in the rubble belt by just like busting through buildings to surprise other animals, which is ridiculous but fun. This thing is the Gruul Rage Beast. Now, Rage Beast is something that's mentioned in the Guildmaster's Guide. So you get situations where beasts of any stripe sort of grow to a prodigious size and get very angry and are kind of encouraged by the Gruul and their magic, and they're kind of set on their city to cause havoc. So I think Rage Beast isn't necessarily an actual species. It's just a classification of beast, and it can describe anything. It's hard to tell from this artwork exactly what this thing is. It's a sort of generic beast, but it's very angry. Then you've got the Gorklan Rampager, which is another generic beast. It looks like something that would be on 2 legs, and it's a bit ape-like. It's another thing that's causing havoc. And you've got some like really big ones. such as the Zhurtar Ancient and the Scar Goliath. So yeah, these rage beasts do get very big. This ancient thing is sort of rising out of the ground, and it's got buildings on its back. So this might be something that's been there for a very long time, and is a creature from before the city. And as someone's built on top of it, represent a very high-level threat that the party could face. But exactly what it is at the moment, I do not know. So then we have cats. So there's numerous depictions of mundane cats amongst the streets of Ravnica. So there's obviously a lot of pets, and something's got to eat the rats. But there's lots of instances of great cats as well. Now, I don't know whether lions are actually present on Ravnica, but I have seen enough references to lions that would suggest they're actually there. It's quite possible a lot of things like lions and tigers are not creatures out in the wild so much anymore, and that they're confined to zoos. It's quite difficult to imagine these things being apex predators when you've got something like an Arynx or a dragon knocking around, but obviously there's room for anything in a fantasy world. But I think there's a lot of evidence of great cats being used as pets. So as well as regular tigers, you've got this is a Zarichi tiger. So this is an example of a magically infused tiger that's being used as a temple guardian at the Zarichi temple, at a particular temple. So that it's possible that that's something that's commonly done. I think the temple is an Orzhov temple in particular. You've got examples of caracals being wild and as pets. This one here appears to be on a leash. You've got lynxes roaming wild. So a lot of these cats are prone to sort of wandering around the back streets, not necessarily out in the rubble belt, but actually just hunting in the streets, hunting other people's pets and actual other people. So panthers are present on Ravnica, definitely, because there's the Twilight Panther. I think this is another magically altered creature that's a pet for the Orzhov. It's bedecked in lots of gold. Could be another temple guardian, or just a guardian for a rich person. You got I put the regular Felidar here. You know, it's a celestial. This is just the non-winged variant for archons that go around on the ground. This is a marker, which is a particular kind of cat that you find on Ravnica. It is a red-furred great cat with 6 eyes, so possibly suggesting a mutation created by the Simic a very long time ago, but is definitely something that has become a natural feature of Ravnica. It's possible they tried to improve the great cats they found to better suit the wilds, but it has thrived, and you sometimes find them coming into the city itself and hunting people's pets, but usually they're found in the rubble belt. And you've got the Arynx, which is a kind of cat-like creature that's got very large horns. This is something that's also found on Tarkia, I think, and also in Thunder Junction, so it's something that exists on multiple planes. It's quite a large threat. And you've got cats. You always have dogs. So there's numerous depictions of regular dogs being used by many people on the plane. The Boros use mastiffs quite often and armour them up to be used as guard dogs, and as Karlov Manor is guarded by these Rottweilers. The Rakdos have their own hellhounds, these like fire-breathing rage mutts. The famous Judith the Scourge Diva has her own hellhound called Tessak, which is depicted here. Then you've got something called a Gorehound, which is some very nasty dog employed by the Rakdos that possibly similar to a death dog, just without 2 heads. There's also a Banehound, which is a 6-eyed nightmare hound that you'd see roaming the Undercity, and it sucks the life out of you. And you've got moss dogs, which are plant dogs, and these are usually found in the Undercity with the Golgari, the bigger variant here, but we've also included a cuter, more domestic version to be used as a pet by, say, the Simic. And you've got wolves. So you've got the normal kind and the bigger kind used for riding, such as that used by Tolsimir Wolfbane. He's got a pet wolf called Voya. The flavor text on the Watch Wolf card suggests that the Selesnya use wolves as watchdogs for their flock. What their flock entails of, I'm not sure. Whether they have sheep or anything on Ravnica, maybe goats. You've got hydras. numerous hydras in the rubble belt. You've got the mutated versions that the Simic makes, such as this hydroid Crassus that's being given a big gas bag to allow it to fly. Then you've got this Hellion Hydra, which is a mixture of Hellion and Hydra. The legendary Ulash the Hate Seed, though originally depicted as a plant Hydra, was changed to be a Hellion Hydra. This is more of a unique thing. I don't think this is... It might not be any more than just Ulashed, but it's something that exists and makes quite a good combat encounter. Then you got the Hellions themselves, which are a bit like worms. I think they're not quite as big as worms, but they are still quite dangerous. They burrow through the ground, and they have a mouth like a furnace. I'm not sure exactly whether they breathe fire, but if you get swallowed by them, you're probably going to get toasted. And they have all of these mandibles around their jaws, which I am sure could grab you. So that's another one to be wary of in the rubble belt. Then you got regular worms themselves. So Ravnica, despite being a city plane, is home to a lot of gigantic worms, such as like the kind you get on Dune. I think I've read somewhere that maybe in its very distant past, Ravnica used to be a desert world in places, so that's a possible reason for there being big worms. And these worms are slightly inconsistent in their depiction. There's different kinds of worms, and they don't necessarily all look the same, such as this Gruul worm from the rubble belt has a more lizard-like feature to it, maybe like a dinosaur, and I think it's got feathers as well. And then the Selesnya worms look more like the worms from Dune, and they armour those up. And you've got these ones you'd find further down in the Undercity. And then you've got these like fluke-like worms you get in the sewers, ambush you there. So there's lots of different kinds of worms. They apparently, when they go through the earth, they use like sonic emanations, and it liquefies the earth, and they can go through it, and it doesn't leave a hole behind it, so it sort of explains why there isn't just tunnels everywhere. Some of the biggest worms in the multiverse exist on Ravnica, such as the World Spine worm. This is one of the biggest creatures in Magic the Gathering, and is absolutely gigantic. This would be a very high level threat for the party, to make for quite a interesting encounter. And I think when this dies, it splits into 3 worms as well. You can see it's sort of like a turducken worm. There's a worm inside a worm inside a worm. And then you've got a bit more mundane horses. There's numerous depictions of horses being used as riding creatures in Ravnica, so that's to be expected. And you've got mules and ponies. And you've got a few more fantastical horses. You've got the Aquus, which is an aquatic horse that is known to be quite difficult to ride because it's quite jittery and skittish, but train one up to accept you, you can get yourself a mount that's able to swim. This is a Vine Steed, which is something that's ridden by dryads. I think you'd have to be quite a powerful druid to be able to maintain a vine steed, because I think it's slightly magical. You've got unicorns as a presence amongst the Selesnya conclave. And then you've got these nightmares, which the Rakdos will ride. So these are often depicted as being double-headed and having 2 sets of legs, not winged or anything. I've given it the stat line of the nightmare in the monster manual. Down here we've got a few sort of random beasts. You've got the Drekovach, which is something from South Slavic folklore. Actually, Ravnica as a setting is slightly based around that region of the world. I think this is a creature from folklore that I think Drekovach means screamer or squealer. So you can imagine this horrible thing making a squealing noise. It is depicted in the card as being a predator that hangs around dark alleys and trash heaps, and I think its bite is suggested to be riddled with disease, so you could have them make constitution checks for getting a disease if they get bitten by it. It's slightly dog-like, so you can imagine someone being crazy enough to take it as a pet or a guard dog, but I think they are just opportunistic predators that roam the streets. And then you've got Grudians, which is a bestial species. They have a sort of carapace, and they sort of hang around in dark places in the Undercity and that, and they also have like an oozing bite. I think they can bear spit like poisonous ooze at people, and I've made it so they come in various sizes. So you have a big bull Grudian as well, bigger, bonier carapace. They make for good low-level threats. You got this thing called a ley line prowler. I'm not entirely sure whether that's just a description of it or whether that's its actual name. It's a nightmare beast that roams the ley lines of Ravnica, the nexus points of mana. So it's a thaumaphage of some kind that eats magic. So you can see it hunting the party and trying to take out their wizards. This is a book devourer, which, by the looks of the artwork, is sort of like an ogre-sized creature of probably magical origin that will just eat people's books. I assume it's eating books for like the purpose of like eating the magic in them, like come after your wizard to try and eat his spell book. It's quite an odd one, but I made a scenario involving those that was quite interesting. So, as I mentioned before, the Simic create a lot of mutations on purpose, trying to make creatures that are better suited to life in Ravnica. They sometimes make one-off creatures that are just experiments, just to see what happens. But if they find something they like, they will make more of it and then try and create an actual population of it. So if a Simic mutation has been around long enough, it will become a stable mutation and just become another part of the biosphere. So these are some examples of Simic creatures that are in the cards. There's a few other ones. I've mainly included the ones that have got easily definable names rather than just being called something Krasis. There's rules in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica for Krasises of different size, and there's lots of different variations for mutations you can give them, and you can make up mutations of your own for various things. So this one is a Lizrog, which is a lizard frog mutation, bound around and bite people. And you got the Scuttlegator, which I think is a crocodile, crab and tortoise or turtle mutation. There's the Skitter Eel, which is part eel, part crab. And the Sharktopus, which is a common favourite, which is crab, octopus, and hammerhead shark. And you've got the Batter Shark, which I think is a ball and hammerhead shark mutation that can be used as a battering ram. And you've got the Shamble Shark, which is a slightly more humanoid Krasis. It's a smaller or a medium-sized Krasis that is hammerhead shark plus crab, and it's got arms as well and can hold weapons. So obviously they try and make sort of sentient Krasises as well. It sort of blurs the line between the hybrids that they make out of sentient races and actual Krasises. This one's a Snapjaw, which I think is a lizard and something. I think it's suggested there's a bit of mouse in there as well, but it's something that's been released out into the wild and causing havoc. It's sort of a bone of contention amongst the populace of Ravnica of whether it is ethical to release these things into the wild, because they often make them quite powerful, and that's quite dangerous if you release something that is ostensibly a apex predator into a biome. It's going to eat something, and that's going to have repercussions. But I'm sure they've done their research and they know what they're doing. This one in the middle here is a legendary Krasis called the Pride of the Hullclad. So the Hullclad is one of the scientific branches of the Simic. There's different clads that specialize in different features. The Hullclad are trying to create something that's got a greater level of protection. It is hard to kill. So their pride and joy is this mutation that's part tortoise, part elk, part crocodile. So this is their pride and joy. This is their favourite one so far. I think it looks a bit goofy. I'm not sure this one is destined for success, but it remains to be seen. I'll include this thing over here called a Protean Hulk. This is something from the first Ravnica set. It's something that when it kind of grows these growths on its back, and when it dies, it releases or mutates into other creatures. The process of mutations in the first Ravnica set for the Simic wasn't quite as well defined as it is now with the system of Krasises. So you did have some random creatures knocking around. The Protean Hulk was quite a well-known one because it got banned in the game in various formats for being a powerful element for making combos, but its abilities would translate to an interesting combat encounter if decided to use it. So as I mentioned before, Ravnica is built upon itself. It's layers of city on layers of city, and as a result the oceans are underground now. They're only really accessible through the sinkholes at the Simic Zonots. So a lot of aquatic creatures are sort of unknown to the general population of Ravnica. The merfolk obviously would know these things, but most people don't get to see the sea. They might see the lakes in the Lake District, and they'll see canals, but they won't see the sea, and the rivers are also underground as well. There are still a lot of creatures under there that just might be a bit more adapted to life in a deep sea where you don't get to see the sunlight. A lot of these aquatic creatures, they are sort of implied to exist by the presence of Simic mutations. They use a lot of things like crab and eel and hammerhead shark, so it's logical that you can include things like that. Manta rays as well are implied. In the book, it mentions things called benthids, which are especially giant oceanic creatures. So you'd have these as just being gigantic versions of creatures that already exist. So an octopus benthid and a crab benthid and a shark benthid, which make reasonable threats. It does mention that you can use a lot of stat lines like kraken and dragon turtle and things like that, plesiosaur, to represent benthids. It doesn't necessarily mean that dragon turtles and plesiosaurs are actually existent on Ravnica. Those make good equivalents. There's a kind of giant crab called a wishcoin crab that's depicted. I like to think that this thing likes to take little bits of treasure, little coins, and bury them somewhere. So it makes for a bit of environmental storytelling, that if someone passes their nature check and realises what this creature is, they could follow it and find its little stash and take it, or add to it if they're especially kind to this crab. There's a depiction of this big leviathan creature in one of the cards, and this is something that's being ridden by the planeswalker Kiora. Because it's from War of the Spark, I'm not entirely sure whether this is depicting something that actually exists on Ravnica, or whether this is something that Kiora has summoned from somewhere else, like Theros. So even though there is this Leviathan card, I'm not sure whether this is a Ravnican Leviathan. There are giant anemones in Ravnica. Those could be a potential hazard if you do an underwater adventure. There's these things called Narcomoebas that are shown to exist on Ravnica. These are illusionary creatures that are like jellyfish, and I think the name Narcomoeba suggests they send you to sleep. Their existence also suggests that jellyfish are a thing on Ravnica, I've decided. There is another Leviathan creature that definitely exists on Ravnica called the Grozoth. It sounds like it would be a legendary creature, but it's not. It's just there's more than one Grozoth. And these are suggested as being somewhere in the Undercity and something to do with the Dimir. There's a few bits of artwork that suggest the Grozoth is able to send its tentacles up through the sewer network and up through the water pipelines to kidnap people and take them, which makes for an interesting plot hook. It's another very significant threat that's hidden somewhere on Ravnica. I also decided to include a few other things that aren't animals, just for the sake of it. So you've got homunculuses, which are these little one-eyed constructs that people use as little servants, especially amongst the academics, like the Azorius and the Izzet, and possibly the Dimir. There is a version of it called the Humongulus, which is an even bigger homunculus, and it would also suggest there's an even bigger version, which is the Gigamunculus. There's Simic variants of the homunculus, which they have improved by mutation to make a winged version of it, and this one that can climb. They still have the one eye, not necessarily the same kind of eye, but yeah, they've got their improved homunculuses. You also got another kind of construct is the Thrall. This is something that's employed by the Orzhov usually. The Orzhov have this contract-based system where if you are indebted to them, that once your life ends, you are sort of subject to their contract, where like your soul gets separated off to be a indentured spirit to work off your debt, and your remaining body without its soul becomes a thrall. And it's this little grey creature that has a gold mask that's used as a sort of servant, an unthinking servant that's also a bodyguard. And there's a few variants of these. There are the regular thralls, there's winged thralls, and they come in different sizes as well. There's evidence of large thralls and huge thralls. Now it's possible that the size of the thrall is dependent on the size of the body, so maybe a giant or an ogre that has gone through the process becomes the large one, or a giant or a cyclops becomes a huge one. This one here is from a card called More of the Obsidat. So this is owned by the Obsidat Ghost Council that rule the Orzhov. It depicts a strange scene where a bunch of debtors that are walking up a stairs to be fed into its weird little belly mouth. It's very weird. I'm not entirely sure if that's something that's commonly done much use of, or whether they just got this one of them. Strange situation. There's also evidence of thralls that have got a parasitic nature that suck the life out of people. So I made a variant of a thrall called the thrall parasite. In early Ravnica, there is existence of a Rakdos thrall called the thrall Expitter, which looks slightly different to the other thralls. I'm not sure whether this represents current canon. I've seen no evidence of Rakdos using thralls, and it seems to go against what the established canon is for how the thralls are made, being part of this debt procedure. Possible that the Rakdos know how this procedure is done and can subvert it to their own ends, but I wouldn't think it is particularly likely. I've also included a few examples of plants on Ravnica. So, like a lot of planes, Ravnica's got these little saproling creatures that are a bit like awakened bushes. There's variants for the Slesnia and also for the Golgari, who use them in the Undercity. The Slesnia also have all of these plant elemental creatures that look like this masses of plant matter that are tying together bits of building and crystals, and they come in. The Guildmaster's Guide suggests that you can use stat lines such as Awakened Tree and the Woodwode and Tree Ant to represent these. There isn't any depiction of tree folk being a thing on this plane, even though there are on lots of other planes. So I don't think the Tree Ant is supposed to represent actual tree folk, but just these plant elementals that the Slesnia use. So these can come in sizes all the way up to gargantuan. You've got a thing called a Gate Creeper Vine, which is this semi-sentient thing that hangs over gates, and I figured it kind of attacks them with its vines. Yeah, this thing is an ambush predator plant thing. You've got the Vine Lasher Kudzu. So yeah, Kudzu is a real life plant that is especially prone to take over areas and just drown them in plant life. And this is a predatory version of that attack with its vines, so it could be a deadly thing to have around. And you've got the grasping sundew. So a sundew is a real world predatory plant that eats flies. It has these little fronds that ooze globs of mucilage that will stick to flies. They land on it, and this Ravnican version is a gigantic version that's big enough to pluck a drake out of the air. There's always drakes getting hurt. You've got Woodkin. This one's a petrified one, so I think it's from the Axebane forest. This is best depicted by the Woodwode stat line because it's seen using weapons. You've got some Simic plants, such as the Hydropon, which I think is used for feeding purposes. It's a good source of food. You've got the Phytohydra, which is a plant that it multiplies very quickly if damaged. So it just creates more and more of it. There's depictions of a Phytohydra that's as big as a house, or that is chasing people down. You also got Moulder Vines, which are used by the Golgari to sort of cover themselves as a sort of makeshift armour. They've got control of these moulder vines, and it sort of enhances them. I've also included my depiction of how plant zombies work in the Undercity. So I mentioned it before in my video about Golgari Mat, that I decided to make a set of rules for how fungus zombies worked, and that to separate regular necromantic zombies from fungus zombies. And that there's this fungus called the corpsejack fungus that grows on corpses and then takes over the corpses and sort of resurrects them as a kind of zombie. Some of the more druidic necromancers amongst the Golgari are actually controlling the plants rather than controlling the bodies. So they have control of the corpsejacks, and these come in different sizes dependent upon the size of the corpse. So you have medium-sized ones, like ogre-sized ones, and giant-sized ones. Over time, the corpsejack fungus sort of eats the body, and eventually it grows to a point where it's more plant-like, and it becomes a wood wraith. These wood wraiths can eventually keep growing and growing and growing past the point where they don't need the body any longer, and it becomes a wood wraith corruptor, which is a sort of magical creature in itself. But yeah, that's how I decided to depict it. There's You also get these things called skulljacks, which are where corpsejack fungus has taken control of a body that doesn't necessarily have enough left to eat on it, so it's just like a skeleton, so they're just eating up the last bit, and they probably won't have enough food to grow to the point where they're a wood wraith. I've also shown a few things that are constructs that suggest animals in the Ravnica setting. So there's this thing called a leashling, which is some construct that's made out of strapping. That's obviously some kind of creature. I'm not sure what. Maybe just a dog. You've got the red herring artifact creature. Suggests that herrings and fish are a thing on Ravnica. You've got this thing, which is the magnetic shuffler, which is used by detectives to find the murder weapon. Now this thing, it's not entirely obvious what it's supposed to be, but it looks a lot like an anteater. So if it was made a robot anteater, then I would suggest that anteaters are a thing on Ravnica. This thing is a codex shredder. It's not a creature or anything, but it's a piece of equipment that is used for shredding documents, and it looks a lot like a lion. So include this as some evidence that lions exist on Ravnica, or maybe it's just a Felidar or an Arynx. Also included several depictions of Ravnican thopters, these little flying artifact creatures. These are all got like 4 wings, and it would suggest giant insects. So it's possible some of these are based on the physiognomy of a spire mangler, that giant insect I showed earlier on. And you've also got this thing called a buzz crusher, which Krenko is shown riding around on in a recent set. This thing looks a lot like a Xanakev locust to me. It's got the same kind of carapace and wings and horns to its side, so it's probably based on that. But yeah, if you've got a giant metal insect, maybe there are other giant metal insects that it's based on. So that's all I've got to talk about today. Hopefully this wasn't too long and rambling, and you've gleaned something from this talk. I definitely enjoyed doing so. If there is sort of enough, if there is enough interest, I might be encouraged to release my spreadsheet of stat lines for some of these creatures as a Patreon goal, if you want me to set up a Patreon. But for now, that is goodbye.